How's it going, guys?
So, what was your, initial thoughts on the first time out there?
Yeah, obviously, want to have a better performance offensively than we put on tape the other night, but we got things that obviously we need to correct. I thought the biggest thing that stood out in the game is we weren't staying on schedule, right? We had a lot of first and longs, second and longs. Penalties led to a lot of that, a couple negative runs. So I think if we were able to better stay on schedule and kind of eliminate some of those miscues on early downs, we'll keep ourselves in more manageable third down situations and lead to a better result.
How much of that is a product of still learning the scheme and getting comfortable inside that?
I think a lot of it comes down to just fundamentals and execution. I feel like we're in a good place mentally as an offense. There really weren't a ton of mental errors from the game, which is encouraging. A lot of young guys in there, their first time with live game action. It's not scripted. It's all calling it from the sideline. So I was pretty encouraged with the mental side of things. I think it's just carrying the fundamental work, that we've done in practice to the game setting. I think that was the biggest takeaway for me.
You had thought process for having Eli Sowers in that role. We've primarily seen him just with the third unit, not doing a lot of blocking in team situations.
Yeah, we want to see what all these guys can do. And tight end's a position that requires a lot of versatility. We're going to ask all these guys to be productive players in both phases. And the preseason is a great opportunity to push these guys and evaluate what they can do and give them things to work on every day at practice, and then see him take it to the game. I know Eli's put a lot of work into improving as a blocker, and along with that entire position group, there's a huge commitment to being productive in both areas. So we want to see what all of our players in that room can do in both phases of the game.
What's the process like with you on the field calling plays, and are you indeed going to call the next game from the booth?
Yeah, it was smooth. I felt comfortable. I thought our staff did a great job. The communication was clear. We didn't have any substitution issues. We didn't have any, play calls get jacked up where, we got caught with them substituting late or anything like that. I thought the lines of communication were clear. I was happy with, how the quarterbacks were able to get us in and out of the huddle. We weren't really up against the play clock at all, so I was happy with that. I'm planning on calling the next game from the booth. I think it's an opportunity to get a feel for both and then go from there. But it was, that's been the plan all along, and I think it'll be an interesting perspective, but I think through this preseason, an opportunity to kind of experience both.
What differences do you expect?
How would you assess the quarterback play with Andy and Tanner in particular? Just how they did.
Yeah, there was some good and some that can obviously improve. I think the third downs have got to be better there. Some of them were tough spots, to be fair. In the third and extra long situations, it's going to be an uphill battle. But I think just play the play. Just stay with the process. Stay with your read, your footwork. There were some good examples. Tanner hit a slant route. Cole hit one to EJ over the middle of the field. We had to get back on track on the first series of the game. Andy had a nice ball to Coop on an out route to get us into a third and manageable. Then we take a penalty, go back to 3rd and 15. So, there were some glimpses there of what we want to see. But I think the biggest thing that the whole group can improve on is just stay within the play, trust your footwork, trust your training, and go cut it loose.
What differences are you keeping an eye on in the operation when you move to the booth?
I think it'll just be more for me in just how I feel I can see the game from there versus the sideline. I've spent the majority of my life on an NFL side, on NFL sideline, a college sidelines. I've seen the game from that perspective. I spent a year in the booth in Green Bay, so but in a different capacity. So I think it'll just be to get a feel for it. Honestly, I just kind of want to experience it once, and I think it'll offer good perspective. And like I said, it was comfortable in game, but the plan all along was to kind of get a taste of both and then move forward with a plan of attack for the regular season. Yeah, he ran around, made some plays. His athletic traits, those are the ones that sometimes in a practice setting with a red jersey, you can't always get a true representation of that, right? The quarterback's not live in practice, but he ran around, did a nice job. There's some things to clean up. I think a couple just smoothing out some of those decisions, right? I'm sure there were some nerves, his first NFL action, third down, kind of thrown into traffic there, but really settled in from that point forward and led us on a nice drive to score and get us on the board at the end of the game.
So what was your personal self-scouting process like after you were looking for out of yourself as a player?
Yeah, I felt comfortable. I felt the call sheet was well organized. Like I said, I was really satisfied with our staff, our players. I thought the communication with Nick, the communication with the players on the sideline, substitution was clean. So yeah, I'd say one game in, I'm very, very happy with our process, and we'll keep always like anything, whether it's scheme or the process on the sideline and calling plays, we'll always try to see if we can make it better. But honestly, through one game, I felt really good about it.
What is something that you learned, Sean, that you can't learn unless you are actually doing it?
Oh, that's a good question. I think it's when you're in a game, and especially when you're kind of up against some longer yardage situations, I think it's just always having a feel for the quarterback, especially when in the preseason it's dictated that a new quarterback's going into the game. We're rotating all of our guys through, but how do we get them into a rhythm? I feel like that's something. Excuse me. Just new quarterback enters the game, might be in a tough spot early. What are his comfort calls? And that's something we get a feel for every day at practice with the guys, and then certainly in the game, it kind of came to life there with a couple long yardage situations early.
Did you have much communication with Jalen during the game in terms of how he was seeing things from the sideline?
Yeah, he was on the sideline with the QBs the whole time. Great teammate. He was always around. He was engaged. So between him and Parks, there was a lot of resources there to support the quarterbacks on the sideline.
How did Markel Bell show up on film?
Markel did a nice job. I really think we talked about it, I think last week. There's a crop of young linemen that we're really excited about. Markel, obviously, some of our interior players, Willie, Drew, Jake did a really nice job. So a lot of them, and I could name all of them, but a lot of them are, have done a nice job in practice. It was cool to see them in live game action. But you could feel the play style, the effort. That was the one thing that stood out. I know we didn't have the performance we wanted, but the effort was there across the board, and Markel certainly had a big part of that.
With Markel, I noticed there were a few times where he was in a 2-point stance and the rest of the line is in a 3-point stance. Is that just because he's so tall, it's hard to get down on the ground? And I guess what goes into that decision making?
Yeah, we use both, and we train all of our guys to be in both. Sometimes it's based on the alignment, where they may be in a 2, they may be in a 3. But Coop does a great job. We're going to train all of our guys to be able to use both stances.
How limited was the menu, so to speak? And as you watch the game back, do you think this is what I would call in this situation if I had to play at my disposal?
Yeah, you always do. You kind of a little after-action report and self-scout in terms of how you call the game and things you could do better, things that you want to lean into further. The scheme and the game planning in the preseason is almost a little bit secondary to wanting to evaluate the guys in terms of their execution, their fundamentals. So we kept things pretty close to the vest there. But again, we wanted to see these guys go out, play, execute their assignment and play with good fundamentals. It wasn't really a setting to kind of totally turn it into a game plan specific type of game.
What would you like to see?
Can you dip into the playbook a little more in joint practice because there won't be film for other teams to study?
Yeah, I think anytime you're practicing, you're always kind of exploring new things. You're tinkering with things. You have your system in place. How do we make little tweaks? How do we build off of some things we've been doing? So practice does give you an opportunity to explore that further, especially a joint practice going against a different team, a different defense, front structure, so on and so forth. So there is a little bit of a window to do that in the joint practice setting.
Kind of following up on that, it's obviously a big opportunity for the starters to get a lot of action. What are you kind of looking for, from those guys when you're going into the Patriots?
Yeah, I think it's largely the same. The starters, they didn't get the work in the preseason. The preseason one, so I think it's an opportunity for us to see them execute. Get aligned, play with great fundamentals. I think it'll be a good opportunity for us to see them think on their feet too. There could be some looks that you see in joint practice that are unscouted, but it's a great opportunity to see us kind of problem solve as an offense, to see our players, play with great football intelligence, react to maybe an unscouted look, see different fronts, different personnel, for our offensive linemen, right, to block a different rusher, who maybe has a different arsenal of moves. So there's a lot of advantages to the joint practice for the starters, especially, they didn't get that live action last week.
There was a series in the game where you were moving the ball on the ground pretty well with Bill in there. What did you like about just the execution of the run game on that drive?
Yeah, Will ran really well. It's always a group effort. I thought our guys were running off the ball. They were attacking their aiming points. Will had a couple nice creases, on a couple different run schemes, and he's a talented player. He's been a great special teams contributor here. He's got great protection ability, so it was nice to get him going. Again, it unfortunately kind of stalled out after a penalty, but you could feel the momentum kind of shifting with our run game there for a minute. We just have to sustain it. That's the challenge. But Will did a nice job.
Was there a common thread between the whole? Literally's unique size and skill set. Is there ways to get him involved creatively outside of sort of the normal structure?
There may be. That's right now we're just excited about what Willie's been doing every day at practice. He's had a really strong camp so far. He competes. He has great play style, physicality every day, and he's done a nice job. So we're just going to keep evaluating him from there, and down the road maybe. But we're excited with what we've seen. We just want to kind of keep him on the path keep him on track with what he's been doing so far. He's off to a nice start.
A guy like Andy, who has such a wide range of experience and tape, what matters in terms of evaluating him in a preseason game?
It's really no different whether you're in year 1 or year 17. It's execution, it's accuracy, it's playing on time. It's all the same things. I think with Andy, it's not his first go around like it is say for Cole, but it's the same evaluation.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, guys.